Great, we're live. Awesome. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is the second platform co-op roundtable. Today, we're talking about scaling community control and user democracy. User wasn't in there, but we couldn't fit into the Facebook invite name. And so this conversation is a follow-up to our last conversation in December, which sort of came out of the By Twitter movement, which Danny will talk about in a few minutes. And that conversation was about how could users possibly convert a business, a massive business like Twitter with 320 million users, and turn it into a user-owned and governed cooperative. And so we sort of talked through other models. So we had experts talking about their work in converting businesses to cooperatives, for instance, and the sort of rethinking around stock ownership and shareholding, and maybe differentiating between workers and users and developers. And it was a fascinating conversation. Shareable has a recap of that if you're interested in watching it and reading about that. So today, what we decided to do was to go a little bit deeper and talk about what, once users owned a platform, whether it's something as large as Twitter or something maybe more small scale, how users who would not be in one place, and there would be maybe hundreds, thousands, or millions of people, how they could possibly negotiate, make decisions together, and actually make a platform cooperative viable. So just to introduce myself, my name is Myra Sutton. I'm at Shareable as their community engagement manager. And I lead some of their campaigns. I write and make sure that Shareable's website stays up. We are a nonprofit magazine and public media outlet that writes about the sharing movement and the solidarity economy. We share podcasts and articles and stories and how-to guides about people sharing and starting cooperative and solidarity economy projects on the ground everywhere in the world. And we do that because we think it inspires people, and it's a way to make this movement grow from the bottom up. Before this, I was with the Electronic Frontier Foundation for almost 5 years, working on international copyright policy and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement negotiations. So, so I got introduced with two other of my, I guess, co-organizers of this speaker series, Matt Kropp and John Guerin. Matt is, I'm going to read his bio here, is based out of Burlington and is the Associate Director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center and Board President of Full Barrel Cooperative. He's an expert on credit union history, part of the Co-op Water Cooler Editorial Collective, and is Chief Manager of Vermont Solidarity Investment Club. And he's doing our tech for today, so give him a thumbs up. John Guerin cultivates relationships within and between networks, focusing on how conversations around sharing and exchange can be used to develop relationships, skills, and bring equity into community. John is a contributor for Enspiral, a co-founder of the Indie Tool Lending Library, and an equity fellow at a multicultural and intergenerational community center called the I'm going to butcher this, the Kepro Institute.
Kepra, yeah.
Kepra Institute.
It's a dung beetle, that's all you need to know.
So we got together and organized this out of the By Twitter movement. And we decided that it was good to bring in experts and thought leaders and people who have been on the ground thinking about cooperatives and the digital economy and bringing them together to just talk through how this could possibly work. So I'll give a brief overview of what platform co-ops are. So a platform co-op is essentially a digital platform, so a website or a mobile app that is designed to provide a service or sell a product, and that's collectively owned and governed by the users. The users can be the people using it. Simply, if you are a Twitter user, somebody that's posting tweets, or if you are an eBay user, for instance, you are a buyer. But more maybe core to this is the people who are providing their service. So, if you think about Uber or Airbnb, those are the drivers of Uber, or the home providers, or the property managers of these platforms, and how those people can share in the wealth and in the governance and be sort of core to the objective and the function of these enterprises. And the platform co-op movement really came out of this this realization that this, sharing movement, the Ubers and the Airbnbs and all of those companies were really taking advantage of essentially the capital that people had, which is their cars or their homes or their idle resources, and were a platform to connect people to use them, but weren't sharing the wealth. It was very extractive, even though they were using sort of this idea of sharing as a way to maybe get around certain regulations or to feel, evoke some good fuzzy feelings. They weren't actually doing a great job of being actually sharing and equitable. So the idea sort of came out in 2014, sort of this thinking around this sharing economy and this lack of, equitable treatment of workers. And then Trevor Schultz at the New School, he wrote this blog post that essentially coined the term platform cooperativism, and it's now changed to platform co-op, which is a little bit more manageable as a term. And so that sort of put a stake in the ground. And he and Nathan Schneider at the University of Boulder, Colorado, they organized a conference in New York at the New School, and they brought together all of these people who were already creating or had built a platform co-op and, cooperative experts and commons experts to think about how this movement could move forward. And that was in 2015. In 2016, last year, the two of them came out with a book, essentially a collection of essays about this movement and sort of looking from various perspectives what the potential is, what the needs are. And then there was another follow-up conference in 2016. So I guess I should explain or describe two examples of thriving platform co-ops. So one is Stocksy, which is a stock photo company that's owned by thousands of photographers around the world. So they upload their photos and they share equity. All the profit at the end of the year gets equally distributed among all the photographers. So this is sort of more of a worker platform cooperative model. And then there's a Fairmondo, which is sort of like an eBay, but is a platform cooperative. And they essentially are a marketplace, an online marketplace for people to sell their goods. And the sellers own part of the cooperative. They are stakeholders as part of Fairmondo. And Fairmondo is a federated model. So there's a Fairmondo for Germany, and there's now one for the UK. And so they want these new eBay-like but cooperative versions of an eBay Fairmondo to be based in various countries. So those are just two examples. And we'll get into the details about platform co-ops if people have questions later on. But I'd like to shift it to Danny first to give us a little bit of a very brief summary of the Buy Twitter movement. And then we're going to go to our panelists today, which we are so lucky to have, to talk about their perspective about the platform co-op movement. And then we're going to sort of open it up from there and sort of have an organic conversation about this. Okay, so Danny, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Myra. Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Spitzberg, and I'm a sociologist with ethics, for hire. And I do a lot of work with community platforms and memberships, and I've been in the co-op sort of network sector movement, I suppose, for what it's been in the last 7 or 8 years. And in the fall, when Twitter was starting to hit a rash of rumors that it was getting sold, some people started speculating about better ways to handle this 11 billion, now down to $10 billion company in its valuation for where it could stay. And I'll fast forward to the other night when someone said, hey, one day we're going to be out in space. We're going to be on a space station like Deep Space Nine and Star Trek, and we're going to look back on Twitter becoming democratically owned and think to ourselves, gosh, it all started then with those shareholders who had a better vision for how to handle this global communications platform. And we'll be sipping our, what do they call those things on Star Trek? Our
Earl Grey hot.
Thank you.
Uh-oh. Did he freeze?
And with regards to the business model, with regards to the governance model. Over the last 7 or 8 months, we've got a shareholder proposal into Twitter. It's the only one being voted on over the next few weeks, and they called the vote on May 22nd. So I'm really excited to hear what everyone has to say about ways of doing good and smart and kind governance for millions of people, or with millions of people, literally over 100 million at least, so-called real users on Twitter and other stakeholders who exist around the world, because it's an order of magnitude or more compared to the next largest retail or consumer-owned co-op. And especially important, and this is my last point, is there are a lot of people who come to this campaign. It's both the Star Trek, Trekkie, future-loving visionaries, the potential, and a lot of people who want to end censorship and allow the dark elements of some political factions to have their voice and their hate and their questionable stance on how people ought to be ruled or governed. They're there too, and they're in our Twitter feeds. So with that many people, how might we get ahead of the curve? How might we put good governance, just like people say social good these days? That's a real curiosity for us. And myself, Myra, Matt, and many others, Nathan, are all core organizers in this, and it keeps growing. So I'm excited to hear what insights come here that can move to this large group of organizers.
Yes, thank you for that, Danny. And again, getting 51% of shareholders to approve the exploration of this maybe is a long shot, but if 3%, which is much more attainable, is achieved, then we have a whole other year to organize if people are still using Twitter and haven't all shift to Mastodon. If people still are using Twitter, then that's a whole other year for more people to buy shares, maybe for people to be talking about this. And again, like the fact that Vanity Fair and Recode and all of these major outlets already talking about this potential is already a success. This idea is hopefully becoming a viral idea, and it's sort of just questioning the central premise, as Douglas Rushkoff would say, the operating system of these businesses. I think that is already, a major achievement. So before we move on, I'd like to make a programmatic update, which is unfortunately two of our panelists could not make it, Alana and Shona, but we are lucky to have Susan Basterfield instead. And I'll let the experts introduce themselves, a brief overview of your background, and why you think this movement is important. So just 2 minutes each, and then we'll go into, I'll ask the first question. So Susan, and then maybe Terry, and then Michel.
Thanks, Maura. Yeah, really glad to be here, and was thrilled to get the invitation from John last night, a last-minute substitute for Alana, who obviously can't be substituted, but I'll see what I can do. So I spent 25 years in senior leadership roles in big, huge multinationals like IBM and British Petroleum and Telstra and Vodafone. And about 3 years ago, I finally decided enough. So my last 3 years have been spent really deprogramming myself, and honestly, and really looking at how I wanted to reorient my relationship with citizenship and participation and the value of work. And fortunately for me, Enspiral is in my home country here in New Zealand, and started intentionally participating with them to see how and feel the lived experience of 250 humans that are actively participating in an alternative economic system, an alternative posture in terms of relation to work, and spawning tools that are going to help not only us as our little collective, our little, relatively speaking, compared to Uber 250 person collective. And you really twig something for me, Maura, in your introduction, is that sort of reoriented my thinking around Enspiral and what I do within it, which is doing the work of the emergent work of the platform, as well as in my day work, helping and working with organizations globally who are in the very either early or middle steps of reorienting their power structures internally, using technology in a way that enables participation and citizenship within the organization to be expressed in entirely different ways. And so my interest in this conversation, in this movement, is how can we sort of come together with our varying levels of practice with the same intention to amplify what we're trying to do, find and harvest those examples that we know are going out there in the world all the time around us, to shine light on them and to give individuals and organizations and movements the confidence to keep trying, going faster, see what we can do, and constantly reiterating. So thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Susan. Terry?
You can hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
All right. Well, my name is Terry Bouricius. Co-ops. I was a staff person at a consumer co-op here in Burlington, Vermont, for a lot of experience in politics. I was a city councilor. In fact, I got elected along with Bernie Sanders here in Burlington in 1981. Served with him for a long time, and then served another 10 years in the state legislature as progressive. And I've worked a lot with election reform organizations like Fair Vote, Center for Voting and Democracy nationally. And in recent years, I've been working on a new kind of reform, basically saying that elections are, quite frankly, not the best tool for running large, the jury model, random sample selections of average members in a board of directors, or making major policy decisions where they have a focus and an interest in paying attention to the issues, to avoid, the goal is to avoid management or the apathy issue of large organizations where everybody says, let somebody else worry about the details. I won't belabor that. I'll just leave it there for now as an introduction.
Great, and definitely not last, or definitely not least, but last, Michel Bauwens.
Is it my turn? Okay. Well, I'm the founder of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation, and I guess I have a similar story that, I used to be in the business world for about 20 years. Disenchanted by, I was feeling we were more, participating in creating problems rather than solving them, and at all levels, depleting natural resources, but also psychologically, the stresses that are now so prevalent. And I think the shift for me was like an extractive relationship. 20 years ago, and decided that if everybody, takes care of his own selfish needs and somehow the common good. And so for 400 years, we have this extractive model where, companies look at the world as, how can we extract the maximum amount of value, or, absentee landlords, in this case, shareholders, to a more narrative where you can create entities that are thinking about how can create a livelihood, rather than generative activity, which is creating together. And you apply that to nature, and you apply that to humans. So for 10 years, I've been observing basically of open and free, participatory, and commons-oriented practices. networks to operate at a transnational level. And so in this case, the shift from a what I call netarchical, the hierarchy of the network, the owners of the network, an extractive model, to the platform co-op model is itself become the commons of that network. So you say, this is too important. This is a public good. We need to communicate in that way, and it's just to be left in the hands of these. Now, I think the very fact of should be questioned, because I think the idea that you create a platform is it's to separate it from, and it's something that you can control to an a set of protocols which are interoperable. So for Twitter and by Twitter and govern Twitter, I think that would also actually lead to a different vision of what Twitter would be. That's closed and stands apart and is controlled by management. A truly open platform where people can, like they do with Linux, like they do with Arduino, when many people can at the same time aspects, like basically more like an open source development process than what it is today. But I can talk more about it later.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, I think I got everybody. Okay, so this is a big sort of question, and if we don't get to all of it we'll get back to it. But so what does effective collective decision making look like to you? And can you describe the foundations or preconditions or key elements that enable collaborative deliberation? And if you could root that in a real example from something you've observed or something that you have participated in, to sort of, obviously make it a reality and also show a example of a success of a collaborative deliberation process, and hopefully one that is obviously scalable for many users in many places all around the world. I guess, I don't know who wants to go first. I guess, Terry, you were starting to talk about a bit of your background in this and your shifting thinking about this. So maybe Terry, and then anybody else is free to jump in after that.
Okay, first, is my microphone unmuted? I can't tell.
Yes, you're good.
Well, there's a serious problem with governing organizations, co-ops in particular, but it can be for-profit enterprises, worker-owner enterprises, it can be all kinds of things. Stuck thinking of goals. One is everybody gets to vote on every issue. People who make all the decisions on our behalf until the next election comes around. Both of those are fundamentally flawed for running a democratic organization. That whether you're voting for candidates for a board, for example, or voting for a particular policy issue, except for rare cases where the policy is so huge that everybody opinion about it. In most cases, most issues, very few people will have taken the time to understand and learn about the issue. Very few people will know about the candidates, particularly when you may have millions of potential or large numbers of potential voters. The fact is, part of this is rational ignorance. One vote has virtually zero chance of changing the outcome of a vote. Rational basis for spending time to learn about the issue and to really cast an informed vote. We get around that in governmental elections by relying on party and various heuristics, shortcuts for. But in a co-op, you don't have those, and quite frankly, they're very faulty. So the notion is a tool which dates back thousands of years. Selection, a jury model. You take a random scientific sample of members, we're gonna treat you well. We're gonna pay you something. Maybe it's discounts. Maybe it's money, but you're going to be paid to short duration and make policy decision here. Well, I think it would be a mistake to use the jury model to actually form a board of directors, because quite frankly, time commitment is probably too great to fill that through basically just picking names out of a hat, because too many of them would refuse to participate. But what you could do for a relatively short duration jury is say, we're going to ask you to recruit a board of directors. You're going to find what are the mixes of skills we need. What are the demographics we need in terms of race and gender? What would a good board be like? Because quite frankly, almost any organization, the people who step forward to fill those roles on their own generally have something wrong with them. They're egomaniacs or whatever, or there's some hidden agenda. They have a special interest in the issue. Sometimes not. It is over the duration, organizations often either become captive of the management, who have an interest in making sure that they have a docile board. Self-perpetuating board forms its own nominating committee, their friends or whatever. And in either case, democracy disappears. So I can go to greater length for now and say that the jury model is quite frankly a perfect model for governing democratically a very large organization. And I will say one last thing about it. Ancient idea, tremendous resurgence in the last couple of decades in countries like Canada, Belgium, Australia. There have been experiments on the governmental level where, for example, whole cities in Australia where the municipal budget randomly selected juries rather than by elected city councils, et cetera, et cetera. So this model is actually being implemented around the world. A lot of potential for democratically governing co-op.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Who wants to go next?
Well, I don't mind going next if nobody else is. So, you know, what I've learned from my observations of what I call peer production, you know, these open communities that create, you know, very complex open source projects, is that they have 3 different levels, and that they don't need to be treated in the same way. So the first level will contribute to the open system. You know, think about the Wikipedia, for example, or Linux. And so you have a contributory system, you know, works in a particular way, and they have maintainers and they have editors, and you know, they have people who protect the technical integrity of the system. And we know pretty much how that works, you know, how open source software is made and produced. And so that's one level. The thing is that we see that in most of these communities there is some organization that maintains the infrastructure. So they don't tell people what to do, or that the infrastructure is there so that people can cooperate. So think about the Wikimedia Foundation or the Linux Foundation. So that's what a Twitter co-op would be that entity that means the capacity of people to improve Twitter, basically, and that it continues to exist, that it has servers, and that should be a democratic organization. Then we see a third level, you know, people are creating livelihoods around these ecosystems. And so we have entrepreneurial coalitions. I think important part, because that's, of course, once you have, it's not the way it works. It's exclude any the users, nobody can contribute. It's a closed system. the internal management is hierarchical, and people carry out the orders of the hierarchy, and I'm the people who want to make the money, so they hire a lot of people platform, but to manipulate us, to make us buy things, to organize advertising, to organize surveillance. So it's important to know that in a public Twitter, it would not be the same. It just wouldn't be the same thing. It wouldn't be the Twitter that we have now. One thing I want to say, and I'm agrees with that, but it's very important to distinguish operational activity from deliberative activity. So big mistake that is often made in horizontal communities is that everything is up for deliberation all the time by everybody. You get a huge overload of processing from studies that last longer than 3 months because people get burned out. So I think it's very important to to make that divide between people who certain tasks are responsible for these tasks, a co-op or something else, from the the broad deliberations of the direction in which a project should go. So I think most communities that I've looked at, they have some kind of constitution. They have a social charter. It's in social code. And what a constitution is for the state is for the commons. I think that's where the first big job of a group would be to determine what is a social charter, what is the values. And sorry if I forget the name, but the very first speaker, I think it was Matthew, describing the plurality of people who want to buy Twitter and mentioning that there's racists and all kinds of people. Well, for me that would already be this is my point of view, right? I would have a social charter which would explicitly exclude those people. I don't think these people should be there. They can have their own things, but they are not the one. I think that the social charter would actually say that all the people have equal say, and it would have values which automatically exclude certain people participating in that dialogue. I mean, okay, I agree this is a controversial point, but this is something that would be discussed in establishing a social charter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Michel, Susan. I think that I agree with you in terms of a social charter or a social contract or an agreement of expectation around how we, not only how we participate with each other from an operational perspective, but how we choose to be with each other from a relational perspective as well. And that's obviously something that is completely absent in most traditional extractive shareholder-focused organizations. And within Enspiral, it's so many examples of how the collective decision-making protocols that we use and the opportunity that we have to utilize Lumio as our platform for first offering ideas for participation, for deliberation, for dissent, creating the space that we can take a week or two to build on, question, reflect, and create an idea, whether it's for an agreement is on something as simple as what is going to be our learning topic for our next retreat, to what is the agreement, what are our financial agreements for the collective. And both of those opportunities hold I guess different participatory expectations. And for me, that's the certainly the trickiest part of this is that one's expectation of another's appetite for participation, even in a collective where that is explicitly expected, is the part that you can't control, right? I mean, this is nothing new. It's in all participatory democracies, unless you're mandating some sort of reflection or vote or element of contribution to the deliberation process. And so I think the way that plays out in our environment is that because we are a curated community, right? So don't be under any illusions. Not anybody can rock up and say, I want to now start participating in the Enspiral collective. You need to be invited in. So the idea that a member needs to trust you, and trust you from the perspective of our initial social contract expectations, which is around trust and passion and courage and openness, and designing for the best for the best case scenario, not the worst case scenario. Something that we've been able to do to curate a scenario where we've got more or less, in most cases, the preconditions that allow us to do this deliberate, effective collective decision making well. How can that scale? I don't know. This is the big question that we're facing today.
Yeah, I feel like all of you sort of touched on, maybe less so Terry, but touched upon the idea of the sort of social contract and the necessity for there to have, some level of trust, or at least an understanding of how people are relating to each other, sort of, agreements about what the norms and sort of, not strict rules, but sort of general rules of engagement are. Could you maybe describe, what that might look like for a large, sort of, heterogeneous blob of people from all over the world? And how could they possibly even decide a social contract if they, if having a social contract is in some ways a necessary precondition to agreeing on anything? and maybe Terry, you could also chime in about, what does that look like within that model of the random selection? How, it sounds like the jury model is a way to sort of prevent, hierarchy and sort of power dynamics from emerging. So you're sort of mixing things up. But like, what does that look like in relation to a social contract that might be decided?
The key challenge for a democratic organization is the bootstrap issue. How do you get this up and running? And that's where some sort of social contract, if you will, exists. It's a democracy of who? In Athens, it was of Athenian women who were not slaves. They had their definition of who was in their democracy. And so one of the first things is who is in of this platform established, and that would be a legal, just a feel-good document, but a legal document of who's part of it. But I think that any bootstrap process that you have I would propose a plan for how this is going to get off the ground, but it then needs to generate a process that will allow it to continue in a democratic way, which means be mobilized and controlled by the quote-unquote founders, controlled by the people who put the most money into making sure that their friends got elected, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to have, I would argue, at least two levels of organization. The first is a rules committee or a rules council, and that in the very first might be a bunch of people who have expertise in facilitation and parliamentary procedure and democracy, together to write an initial of procedures, and if we're going to have juries, how is the jury process going to be drawn so that everybody knows that they were not handpicked, but it was genuinely an open democratic process where every member had equal chance. Rules have to be established, but once they're established, you need multiple code where year after year, new democratically selected by jury process of members come together to review that. And so we need to tweak that. The key thing is it needs to be done democratically, not by the management or some self-appointed people or the people who have an interest in making sure that it can make a bigger profit because they think they can sell their shares or whatever. It needs to be democratic. So process, whether it's a charter or whatever, establish a rules process that will go on for generations in a democratic way. So that's one level you need. You need that, but then you need a separate body, I would say a nominating committee or whatever, that's going to select something like a board of directors, people who are going to be working on it full time for their term of office. And you might have another layer, another jury that gets pulled up once a year, randomly selected members whose only job will be to review the performance of management, to keep their jobs or be fired. And that jury gets pulled every year, new randomly selected members. How's it going, and is it being done well? But I agree that some sort of initial definition of what the democracy is essential.
Great, that was excellent. I mean, I feel like this regular review of the process is so necessary, you know, especially as, you know, new people come in, new hurdles come up. I mean, I obviously am thinking a lot about the United States democratic system and how we created the system of checks and balances. It turns out that those checks and balances don't really check and balance each other. So I often think about what would it look like if our democratic system wasn't based upon a system that was, you know, established when people were slaves and women didn't have any rights, and, you know, a long time ago. And the fact that we haven't adapted to, you know, the current reality is pretty incredible, or, you know, not surprising, I guess. Okay, Michelle or Susan, want to chime in?
Yeah, just quickly, I have a question for you, Terry. Really curious about the idea of juries and about the community annually or however often it decides randomly appointing or selecting individuals to serve on this jury. One of the big curiosities that I've had recently in a participatory organization is that some individuals don't derive joy or you know, have an interest in that governance role. And what was coming up for me is, do you create a social contract, or is one of the elements of the social contract at the beginning the expectation that you will be, if you are participating and a citizen in this community, that you will be open to and be looking forward to your potential selection as part of this jury? What do you think?
Well, there's obviously a distinction between mandatory participation, like in a government for society, where everybody's, by definition, if you live here, you're a part of the society. And you can have mandatory. In some states and countries, there's mandatory jury service on juries. But it's nominally mandatory. People can get out. So I would think that in a co-op, it's a platform co-op, clearly you don't have that level of, people can exit. They can leave the organization if they don't like it. So you can't have mandatory service. If your name is drawn, you must do this. You don't have the legal authority to compel that. However, the strong inducements, you can you can thank them, give them honors, you can pay them, you can do a lot of things to make it so that people will agree. Now, not everybody will, obviously. You know, the the single mom with two little kids at home in diapers. You can provide her with daycare. There's things you can do to help, but there will be started a business and is working 70 hours a week on their business. They're not going to do it. So you can resort to things like stratified sampling, where you on a variety of demographic measures, income, education, gender, age, etc., that your random sample that you draw is then adjusted to make sure that it is actually descriptively representative of the entire membership. That helps. It's not a panacea, but there's two parts of the jury. One is the fact that it ideally will do what the members as a whole would do if they all really dug into the issues and had the time and motivation to really learn about the issues. This jury will do what the whole membership would do if they could do that. But now, obviously, everybody's not going to spend the time. But a jury, you can pay them to spend the time to learn about the issues. The other part about a jury is the anti-corruption element, what's called the blind break. You eliminate the self-selection part. Have an interest in corrupting things or distorting things or taking bribes, you're not going to get many of them on this body, because randomly selection, you're not going to tend to get the egomaniacs and the paths that tend to dominate. There's psychologists say that sociopaths are way overrepresented in politics and in corporate boardrooms. Random selection, you would reduce that. So there's a lot of things you can do to make the juries representative and a very powerful anti-corruption element. If there's other questions, I guess.
Michel, have something to add?
Well, not directly related, but it's kind of related maybe to Susan's experience and something I said in the beginning. We use Lumio as the P2P foundation. Of course, we're not very large, but what I like very much in the Lumio system is, or at least that's the way we do it. It might not be the way Enspiral does it, but so we have a time for deliberation. We have a question. We set a time for deliberation, our mode of decision making. And that gives a certain direction in which we are going. Decided that, then we have a team, an operational team, which is responsible for carrying out this particular thing, and they're backed by the whole continuous of every detail they have to do. They have a broad backing from the community. And then there is the operational side. So I think that distinction is very important. I think the special case with Twitter, though, is we are taking over something that already exists, and it's like a boat or a plane in flight. So we can do whatever we want. We have to make sure that the thing doesn't crash, and so the operational element very important. So I think we need some people who know what they're doing, and then in the background we need to work on the long term and adapting and expanding and changing and reforming whatever needs to be reformed. So we need these two levels. I would also kind of want to, and this probably has been discussed the last time, I think it's the same for governance. I'm very partial to this. It's called fair shares, because it integrates. So the stratification of the jury. I think so. You have people who are using it, but stay because they're users. People who are actually building it. They're doing open source patches, open source, improvements of the whole system. They're contributors. have a stake, and then you have the people who actually work for a salary, the system which have a separate stake. So I think it's quite important to find a governance model that integrates mass. It's not 300 million people. It's and users don't want to know how the thing is built. They don't discuss, what a software patch is going to be. Their concern is can we continue using it, or maybe improve it in certain ways. They're not the same kind of people. People have an effective thing, contributing, making it. Those distinctions are quite important in this model.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that division between the contributors and the sort of operationally core members versus sort of more passive users is that division is sort of necessary, especially if we sort of think about scale, right? Like there's going to be sort of a limited cap in terms of how many people are actively contributing to the code base and are creating features and all this. Whereas, if it's a successful platform, then it could scale to whatever level in terms of the users. And so I guess this is sort of a hypothetical, but what maybe if you think about maybe Wikimedia or some other examples that you've seen maybe in the cooperative ecosystem of a co-op that has scaled a lot, and how they have sort of, if they have had this balance between the workers, maybe if it's a consumer cooperative or worker consumer cooperative, how they balance those those different roles and the different kinds of input into the service. And maybe they have consumer elected board members that are rotated in and out so that they sort of provide input into the core business. Or can you guys, any of you, draw on examples or things that you've worked on that you see could maybe be applicable for a platform cooperative?
I can only speak of my own experience, but okay, if somebody else is, let me just.
Well, I have something, but
okay, go ahead, Terrell.
But something that's worth studying is the German Mitbestellung or co-determination, I believe it is in English. From back in the 1970s, large corporations were required to put more and more employees on the boards of directors. And quite frankly, they've made sure that the shareholders, the corporate stock owners, essentially have majority control. But the idea of having a combined, I'm not sure is ideal. I'm actually a little bit more sympathetic to Michel's notion of a set of tasks and decisions where Twitter usership is allowed to make. You have another set of decisions and tasks and that only the people who are employed there. But I think that the German experience with co-determination, some study, either as a model or as an example of what not to do. I don't know enough about it to advise one way or the other, but it is something that's being done on a large scale, very, very large multinational corporations where a portion of their board of directors are appointed by the employees.
Michel, did you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to say that we've been working for 10 years, and we organize ourselves in terms of streams of activities. So we have an advocacy stream, we have a visioning team, a research stream, an operational team, a stream, and a community. each of these streams has their own, and the coordinators get together, every 3 months or whenever they need. And this works very well for us, basically. And idea that I have is that don't get in panic because it's 300 million people. They're not doing time, so it's not one big undifferentiated mass. You have people work on this, you have people who work on that. So the capacity, I think, to create modules of governance that break down the mass into more scalable, more manageable entities, I think is an important part of governance design. It's not we have to be involved in everything all the time. It's in people, you want them, once every 5 years looking at the constitution. And this is then a huge participatory process, and maybe 15% are actually going to have the willingness and the energy. And so, much more manageable when you start thinking like this, and not saying, it's 300 million people. How are we going to create participation for all of them? It's not going to be neither their desire nor the capacity actually of to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Michel. That gives me a sense of relief around the 50. I don't know where you pulled that 15% participation from, but that feels about right in the Enspiral context. And I absolutely concur that I guess pockets or pods of governance around particular topics or streams is essential. And our Enspiral's sort of latest iteration of that is devolving what we thought was going to be a group of catalysts looking after the overall sort of operational governance of the organization into what we're calling working groups. So now we've got about 8 working groups around communications and finance and brand and various other topics. And by devolving the governance into smaller chunks and enabling the individuals that might have a passion or a energy around a particular topic rather than the overall governance has been really, really useful for us over the last sort of 6 to 12 months.
Great, thank you so much. And so we only have 5 more minutes, but if you're watching the live stream and you'd like to ask us a question or comment, please tweet at by this platform, BUYTHIS platform, by this platform. We really only have a few minutes. I regret not saying that earlier to get your comments. Obviously, as a project to invite more voices, we did not ourselves do a good job of inviting more voices into this conversation, and I apologize for that. And again, I would like to also acknowledge that we're all pretty much from North America and Europe, and are not representative of the diverse usership of Twitter, of obviously the internet. And so we would love to have more diverse voices as part of this conversation. I'm speaking for myself. We'd love to have these roundtables continue and to have more, insight into how large systems or cooperative decision-making and all that works. We really need to have all the lessons and stories of people to make this a viable project. So Danny, if you get any comments, feel free to chime in and read them out, or questions. You have any yet?
I think with the amount of time, it might be just good to get just what's on top for each of our speakers and just give them a little space each to make a last comment as we sign out here.
Sure. Okay, makes sense.
I do have one single question, but
Okay.
it's your call.
Toss it in the room.
So this may be a very real life, real large corporate question. So Nabil is asking for boards. The Twitter board is currently non-staggered, and most boards have annual elections, staggered boards. And I suppose maybe Susan, you're best suited to speak to this, having been through the ringer. How do you see a graceful and well-received challenge to Twitter's current board governance evolving and moving forward in a lot of what we've spoken about in this call to something?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best, but thank you for that. I think that it's a fundamental personal reorientation towards what's possible, and I know that sometimes that feels a little bit jarring to throw into the room, but in my experience, or actually reorienting oneself to a new way of being and acting within any type of role, whether it's a governance role or a board role, needs to come from a personal willingness to explore how things can be different. And I'm sorry if I'm leaving it super esoteric, but yeah, that's sort of my sense to that question. It's probably not very helpful. So maybe Michel or Terry has another idea.
Well, it's very real given our situation, but I appreciate that.
All right, let's go into last minute thoughts and closing reflections. Michel, want to go first?
Well, yes. So I'll just go back to something I said in the beginning, and just to make sure that people understood what I was saying, because maybe I wasn't clear. So here's is the idea. The very idea of Twitter as a platform, it's an extractive model, right? So you want to create something that you can control, that only changes in a certain way, and in a way, a platform can be seen as an enclosure, as a partial enclosure of a commons. Because if we buy Twitter, we shouldn't just think we're taking over what's there. We're gonna open it up, basically, and I think that's a very important thing. That, I don't know if you noticed, but Twitter hasn't evolved in the last 7 years. The few changes are adding ads or there's no change. It's a hyper controlled, hyper closed environment, right? This is not what we want to take over. We want to ensure the universal capacity just to all people in the world. And so once we have Twitter, the way to do that might be very, very different than the way they're doing it now. Make that clear.
Excellent point.
Let me jump in because I have to run to get my son from school. I would just leave one key message, which I think you've heard over and over again, is realizing that elections are not the be-all and end-all of democratic governance, nor is referendum where everybody votes on everything. Jury is a wonderful tool that needs to be incorporated into a large-scale democracy.
Thank you, Terry. And Susan?
Yeah, just thanks for the opportunity to participate, and really echoing the sense here that getting more people into the room that have experiences and opportunities to share, I think would be really great for this conversation.
All right, great. Thank you so much. This has been an excellent conversation. So happy you all were able to make it. We will be probably continuing this conversation again with maybe a few of you or a few others. And Shareable will be doing a recap of the conversation, getting highlights. So if you missed the first half of the conversation, it'll be there, and the whole thing will be posted at this YouTube channel and on Shareable. So thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Myra.